Hi, friends. So I want to talk about Wordle because, for reasons I'll talk about in just a moment, I think we've probably only got this one chance to talk about Wordle. So when we first started playing Wordle together, my wife kind of turned to me and she's like, how is this making money? I don't see any ads. Is it somehow secretly harvesting some sort of data from us as we guess words? Like, what's the income stream here? And for just a minute, I was stumped because Wordle, doesn't seem to have an obvious, what they call business model. And so I Googled around a bit, as one does, and it turns out Wordle is something we used to see a lot of on the web and don't see so much of anymore. It's a passion project. It has no business model per se. It's just something that a developer kind of put together for the hell of it. And what's interesting to me about that is that Wordle has some features, right? Some clever design choices that were built into it that allow it to function without really needing to bring in any income. Namely, Wordle's designed in such a way that it needs an almost ludicrously small amount of effort on the part of a web server to host Wordle for potentially very large numbers of users, right? Like once you transfer the little bit of HTML and JavaScript and CSS that it takes to make that really simple Wordle interface with the word Wordle and the 5 boxes and the little flippy effect for the letters, right? Once you transfer that from the server to the client, you send that once, and then each time someone wants to play Wordle, you really only have to send 5 bytes from the server to the client in order for someone to play Wordle, right? Like a Wordle solution is a 5-letter word, and that's 5 bytes of information. You might only have to send the 5 bytes once when someone first connects, and then that goes to the client side and it's, kind of working from there. Or maybe it's sending 5 bytes every time you guess a word. It doesn't really matter, right? That's just a ludicrously small amount of information to have to send. That means that with the kind of like hobbyist level web server that you can rent for a few bucks a month, like I do or a lot of people do, like if that kind of web server, which can, in my experience, do this, if it can like serve up a 500 kilobyte image to one user, that means it could support 100,000 users all starting a Wordle game at exactly the same time, right? It could conceivably support millions of people playing Wordle as long as they weren't all making a request at exactly the same moment, which is unlikely in part just because of the way the tempo of the game is set up. You're sitting there thinking about the word for most of the time you're playing Wordle. You're not really doing very much. So the odds of everybody making that 5-byte request all at the same time are pretty small. That's only helped by the fact that by design you only play Wordle once a day. That fact that we're all playing Wordle once a day probably adds to like the viral sensation that's Wordle, because we're all playing the same game at once and we can compare our results with each other, and there's no temptation to like have to play more to keep up with your peers. Like you just play once and you're done. So that, right, both makes the thing more viral and makes it easier to host. So that's great. So Wordle just doesn't have any costs to make up, right? Like you can run it on a hobbyist web server, a web server that you and I could rent within our incomes, like very easily, and certainly someone who's a developer could rent. And so it doesn't really need a business model, right? It can just work and be enough for the creator of Wordle to be compensated with like the fun of building Wordle, the desire to like give something fun to the community, and the sort of reputation boost I'm sure they'll get from being able to list creator of Wordle on their resume, right? In other words, the bundle of incentives that we were hoping would drive content creation back in the good old days of believing in a distributed democratic internet. Like, remember those? Those were fun. What's also interesting to me, or something that sort of builds on that, is that the very same elegance that makes Wordle viable as like a no business model creation probably limits its longevity, right? It's a very simple game. I suspect we've all got maybe another week or two of being way into guessing 5-letter words before it's over. maybe another month, maybe 2 months at tops. There are apparently only a few hundred words that are potential answers in Wordle. Like if you look at the code, there's only a few hundred words in there that you can even guess. So it's definitely over within the year. Then it starts looping, and then what are you going to do, right? And that's fine. That's better than fine. That's great, right? Like, it's good. It's better, I would argue, for something to be beautiful for a little while, be fun for a little while, and then be over than to be like an endless, all-engaging transmedia empire, which it seems like everything now desires to be, right? Wordle, for me, almost motions back to something like the feature film. Like, remember the feature film back when that was our most prestigious form of media instead of prestige TV, where you'd go in and you'd be told a story in like 90 to 180 minutes, and then it would be over, right? The whole story would run its course, get set up, tell its story, be done, and it was all done. And you didn't have to have like a 7-year-long parasocial relationship with some, person from the world of Game of Thrones in order to enjoy the story, right? You didn't have to have 7 seasons of like ongoing emotional investment, 90 to 180 minutes, and it was over, right? And I think that kind of points, in a way, to a sense in which, like, the need for business models for big, complicated online games and apps and platforms and even prestige TV sort of situations, there's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That we need to keep people engaged for a long time in order to make enough revenue to pay for all the stuff that we built to keep them engaged for a long time, right? And what's interesting for me about Wordle then is it kind of demonstrates that this isn't like a necessary outgrowth of technology or human nature. It's a choice. Like, there's clearly a desire for smaller, lighter, more bounded media experiences. I think we like Wordle because it's so small and it's so light and it's just this once-a-day thing, and we like that it's over. And so I hope we get more of them, right? Even though they don't make any money, even though they don't have business models per se. Anyway, enjoy Wordle while it lasts, friends. That's my thoughts about what it might mean. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you all later in the week and into next week. I'll see you then.